Walk into any trendy coffee shop today and you'll witness something fascinating. There's a 22-year-old typing her novel on a 1960s Royal Quiet Deluxe typewriter, the same model Jack Kerouac used. Across the room, someone born in 2001 is carefully threading a roll of film into a Pentax K1000, a camera that's older than their parents. At the counter, a barista wearing a Led Zeppelin tour shirt from 1975, a tour that happened 20 years before she existed, is grinding beans on a manual burr grinder that requires actual effort and time. This scene isn't an anomaly. It's happening in Brooklyn and Berlin, in Tokyo and Toronto. An entire generation that grew up with smartphones is choosing rotary phones. Kids who learn to read on iPads are collecting vintage books. People who stream everything are buying vinyl records that cost $30 each and require a turntable worth more than their monthly groceries. What's going on here? Why are digital natives, people who've never known life without the internet, becoming obsessed with analog relics? Why are they choosing complexity over convenience, slow over fast, old over new? The answer reveals something profound about what we've lost in our rush toward the future, and what young people are desperately trying to reclaim. This isn't just about a few hipsters in artsy neighborhoods. We're witnessing a massive cultural shift. TikTok is flooded with thrift flips and vintage hauls. Instagram accounts dedicated to film photography have millions of followers. YouTube channels teaching people how to repair 1950s appliances are going viral. Young people are spending their weekends at flea markets, estate sales, and antique shops like they're treasure hunting. And here's what's really wild. They're not just buying old things as curiosities or decorations, they're using them. That teenager with the vinyl collection actually listens to those records. The college student with the film camera shoots with it daily. The 25-year-old who bought a 1970s Honda motorcycle rides it to work every day, rain or shine. This isn't nostalgia in the traditional sense. Nostalgia implies longing for a time you remember. But most of these young collectors never lived through the eras they're embracing. A 20-year-old buying 1980s furniture has no personal memory of the 80s. So what's really driving this fascinating cultural phenomenon? The answer is more complex and more revealing about our modern world than you might think. Let's start with the biggest driver, authenticity. We live in an age where everything feels fake, manufactured, or algorithm generated. Your Instagram feed is curated. Your Spotify playlist is created by AI. Even your text messages get suggested responses. Young people are drowning in a sea of artificial experiences, and they're desperately reaching for something real. That vintage leather jacket isn't just clothing. It's a story wrapped in cowhide. You can see where the previous owner's wallet wore a mark in the back pocket. You can feel decades of adventures in the creases. That 1960s turntable doesn't just play music, it requires ritual, intention, and presence. You can't skip tracks with a swipe. You have to physically get up, walk over, and lift the needle. It forces you to listen to entire albums the way artists intended. In a world where everything can be duplicated, copied, and mass-produced instantly, these objects represent something increasingly rare. Uniqueness, born from time and use. They can't be replicated on a 3D printer or downloaded from an app store. Their authenticity comes from their imperfections, their history, their very inability to be perfectly reproduced. Here's something that might shock you. A KitchenAid mixer from 1985 can still whip cream perfectly after nearly 40 years of use. Meanwhile, the latest model from the same company might break after 18 months. This isn't an accident. It's by design. Planned obsolescence means companies intentionally make products that fail, so you'll buy replacements. But old things were built in a different era, when craftspeople took pride in creating items that could outlive their makers. A solid wood desk from the 1970s was built to last decades. The joinery is precise. The finish is deep and rich. Compare that to today's particle board furniture that starts sagging after 6 months. A vintage Levi's denim jacket from the 1960s will outlast 5 modern jackets. The denim is heavier, the stitching is stronger, the hardware is solid metal instead of cheap plastic. Young people recognize this quality because they've been burned by cheap products their entire lives. They've watched phones slow down after updates, seen fast fashion fall apart after a few washes, and experienced the frustration of replacing things that should have lasted years. When they discover something that's not only survived decades, but still functions perfectly, it's a revelation. Quality isn't just better economics. It's a form of respect for the user that's largely disappeared from modern manufacturing. Every generation rebels against what came before, but Gen Z is doing something unprecedented. They're rebelling against the present itself. While their millennial older siblings embrace the latest apps and their boomer grandparents chase new gadgets, Gen Z is deliberately choosing to step backwards in time. Think about it. They're the first generation to grow up with smartphones, yet they're buying Polaroid cameras. They've never known life without streaming, yet they're collecting vinyl records. They learned to type on touchscreens, yet they're hunting for mechanical keyboards that sound like machine guns. This isn't just nostalgia, it's a deliberate rejection of a world that prioritizes speed over satisfaction, convenience over connection. It's punk rock philosophy applied to consumer culture. Where punk rockers rejected mainstream music, today's young people are rejecting mainstream technology. They're saying, just because something is newer doesn't mean it's better. They're choosing friction over frictionless, analog over digital, slow over fast. In a world that demands constant upgrades, choosing something old becomes the ultimate act of rebellion. It's countercultural to use a film camera when everyone has a phone with a better lens in their pocket. Here's the ultimate irony of our time. Social media, the pinnacle of modern digital culture, has become the driving force behind the vintage movement. Instagram is flooded with hashtag film photography posts that get millions of likes. TikTok creators make entire careers out of thrift shopping and vintage restoration. YouTube channels dedicated to fixing old electronics have subscriber counts that rival major TV networks. The algorithm that's supposed to push us toward the newest trends is actually amplifying our love for the oldest things. A video of someone developing film in their bathroom gets more engagement than the latest iPhone commercial. A vintage outfit haul outperforms sponsored content from major fashion brands. The same platforms that represent peak technological advancement are being used to celebrate and share pre-digital culture. But here's what's really fascinating. Young people aren't seeing this as contradictory. They're using modern tools to build communities around analog experiences. They're creating digital archives of physical objects. They're live streaming the process of fixing 1960s radios. They've figured out how to make the old and new work together, using Instagram not to show off the latest purchases, but to share the stories behind vintage finds. Social media becomes a way to connect with other people who understand why that 1970s leather bag or 1950s coffee pot matters. Young people are the first generation to truly understand that the planet is in crisis. And they're not waiting for corporations or governments to fix it. They're taking action with their wallets. And vintage shopping has become a form of environmental activism. Every thrifted sweater is a sweater that doesn't contribute to the 2,700 liters of water needed to make a new cotton t-shirt. Every restored piece of furniture represents trees that don't get cut down, factories that don't pollute, and transportation that doesn't burn fossil fuels. The fashion industry alone produces 92 million tons of waste per year. Fast fashion brands encourage people to buy, wear once, and discard. But vintage shopping completely subverts this cycle. That 1980s blazer has already been made. Buying it creates zero additional environmental impact. In fact, it prevents one more item from ending up in a landfill, where it would take decades to decompose. But it's not just about environmental impact, it's about conscious consumption. Young people are rejecting the idea that happiness comes from buying new things. They're choosing to curate their possessions thoughtfully, rather than accumulate mindlessly. Sustainability isn't just trendy for this generation, it's survival. They understand that the throwaway culture their parents embraced isn't an option for them. The planet literally can't sustain it. We live in an age of instant everything. Instant messages, instant photos, instant gratification. But old things force you to slow down. And for many young people, that friction is exactly what they're craving. Using a film camera means you get 36 shots per roll, and you won't see the results until you develop them. Every shot becomes precious, intentional, considered. Playing a vinyl record becomes a ritual. You have to clean it, place it carefully, drop the needle just right. You can't skip to your favorite song with a tap. You have to listen to the album as the artist intended, experiencing the flow from track to track. Making coffee with a manual grinder and pour-over setup takes 15 minutes of focused attention. You can't multitask. You have to be present. In our ADHD-inducing, notification-heavy world, these analog experiences offer something revolutionary: the ability to focus on one thing at a time. A typewriter doesn't have spell check, autocorrect, or the ability to endlessly edit. You have to think before you type, commit to your words, accept imperfection. For a generation that's grown up with infinite options and endless scrolling, the constraints of analog technology feel liberating rather than limiting. They create boundaries that actually enhance creativity and mindfulness. Walk into any Target, H&M, or Zara, and you'll see the same mass-produced items that millions of other people will own. In a world of 8 billion people, standing out becomes increasingly challenging when everyone shops at the same stores, wears the same brands, and follows the same trends. But vintage items are inherently unique. They're one of a kind by virtue of their age, wear patterns, and survival. That 1960s dress you found at the thrift store? There might be a few others like it somewhere in the world, but none with exactly the same fade pattern, the same tiny repairs, the same history. That 1970s band t-shirt has been softened by decades of wear in a way that can't be replicated by modern distressing techniques. These items become part of your personal brand, your visual identity, in a way that buying something new from a store simply can't match. For young people building their adult identity, vintage clothing and objects become a form of self-expression that feels authentic rather than manufactured. When someone compliments your outfit, you can tell them about the estate sale where you found it, the old woman who owned it before you, the decade it represents. You're not just wearing clothes, you're wearing stories. In an age where personal branding matters more than ever, vintage items offer a way to curate an image that's genuinely unique and personally meaningful. When you buy something vintage, you're not just acquiring an object, you're inheriting a piece of history. That 1960s camera might come with the original leather case, manual, and even some undeveloped film from the previous owner. Suddenly, you're connected to someone who loved photography 50 years ago. You're using the same viewfinder they looked through, holding the same metal they held, seeing the world through the same lens. This creates a form of time travel that new objects simply can't provide. Every scratch, every worn spot, every repair tells a story. That vintage sewing machine was used to make clothes for a family through the 1970s. That wooden desk was where someone wrote letters, paid bills, and maybe even wrote a novel. These objects carry the residue of human experience in a way that's both mysterious and intimate. Young people are hungry for this kind of connection in an increasingly disconnected world. They're tired of disposable relationships, temporary jobs, and digital interactions. Vintage items offer a way to connect with previous generations, to feel part of a longer human story. When you restore a 1950s radio back to working condition, you're not just fixing electronics, you're preserving someone else's memories and creating new ones. It's a form of communion across time that satisfies a deep human need for continuity and meaning. There's something primal about the hunt for vintage treasures that online shopping can never replicate. Amazon's algorithm might predict what you want, but it can't replicate the thrill of digging through boxes at an estate sale and finding a mint condition 1970s leather jacket for $5. Etsy might have vintage sections, but it can't match the serendipity of stumbling across a rare vinyl record at a flea market. The hunt becomes part of the pleasure, maybe even more important than the actual purchase. Seasoned thrift shoppers talk about their finds the way treasure hunters discuss discovered gold. There's strategy involved, knowing which neighborhoods have the best estate sales, understanding what days thrift stores restock, recognizing quality when you see it buried under piles of junk. But it's not just about finding deals, it's about the element of surprise and discovery that's been optimized out of modern shopping experiences. When you walk into Target, you know exactly what you'll find. When you scroll through Instagram ads, they show you products based on your previous behavior. But when you walk into a vintage shop or estate sale, anything could be waiting. That uncertainty, that possibility of finding something amazing and unexpected, satisfies a fundamental human desire for adventure that algorithmic shopping can never provide. Let's address the elephant in the room. Young people are broke. Student loan debt, skyrocketing housing costs, stagnant wages, and an economy that seems designed to extract wealth from younger generations have created a financial reality that's harsh and unforgiving. In this context, vintage shopping isn't just aesthetically pleasing, it's economically necessary. A solid wood dining table from the 1960s might cost $200 at an estate sale. The same quality table new, if you could even find one, would cost $2,000 or more. A vintage leather jacket that will last decades costs less than a cheap fast fashion jacket that will fall apart in a year. A 1970s stereo system with superior sound quality costs a fraction of modern audiophile equipment. But here's what's really interesting. Young people aren't just buying vintage because it's cheap. They're buying it because it offers better value. They've learned to recognize quality, to understand the difference between price and worth. They're willing to spend time hunting for good pieces rather than money buying new ones. In a generation that's been priced out of traditional markers of success like home ownership, vintage goods offer a way to live well on less money. It's resourcefulness disguised as style. Financial survival repackaged as aesthetic choice. Fashion and culture have always moved in cycles, but what's happening now is unprecedented. We're experiencing multiple decades simultaneously. Y2K fashion is trending alongside 1970s bohemian style. 1980s neon is mixing with 1990s grunge. And 1960s mod is having a moment right next to 2000s emo revival. It's like all of fashion history is happening at once. This isn't random. Social media has accelerated cultural cycles and made every era simultaneously accessible. TikTok algorithms don't distinguish between trends from 2019 and trends from 1979. They just show you what's getting engagement. This creates a kind of temporal flattening, where young people can pick and choose the best elements from every decade without being constrained by chronological order. But there's something deeper happening here too. Previous generations had to wait 20 years for their youth culture to come back in style. Gen Z doesn't want to wait. They're actively mining the past for inspiration, taking what works and leaving what doesn't. They're creating something entirely new by combining old elements in fresh ways. That person wearing 1990s jeans with a 1970s band t-shirt and 2000s accessories isn't copying any particular era. They're creating their own aesthetic timeline. It's cultural time travel as creative expression. So the next time you see a young person with a film camera slung over their shoulder, or someone your age carefully selecting vinyl records, or a teenager wearing a band t-shirt from before they were born, remember, they're not trying to live in the past. They're using the past as a toolkit to build a better future. They're rejecting a throwaway culture in favor of things that last. They're choosing authenticity over artificiality, quality over quantity, stories over stuff. They're finding ways to be individuals in a mass-produced world, to slow down in a speed-obsessed society, to connect with something deeper than the latest trends or newest technologies. This vintage revival isn't about nostalgia, it's about values. It's about saying that newer isn't always better, that faster isn't always preferable, that more isn't always necessary. It's about finding meaning in objects that carry history, beauty in things that show wear, value in items that have stood the test of time. The young people embracing vintage aren't living in the past. They're creating a more thoughtful, sustainable, and authentic way of moving into the future. What old thing speaks to you? What vintage item has caught your eye? Let us know in the comments below. Share your own vintage finds with us, and don't forget to subscribe for more insights into the fascinating ways our culture continues to evolve and surprise us.